What does it truly take to become a full-time author? How much are you going to have to sacrifice to even touch a small part of your artistic potential? Well, Ernest Hemingway is going to guide us today with a beautiful quote on the heavy price you'll have to pay to get that it factor in your writing and in your persona. Because when I look at Hemingway, I first see a spark of energy. Even if it's in a malignant masculine way, he does stand out. His writing, compared to some of his contemporaries in American modernism and European modernism, stands out. Read Hemingway's Nick Adams stories and tell me that's not some of the best American writing ever. But just like athletes have to sacrifice their body and their longevity over the long term to become a god for a second in time on the field, writers also have to give something up to reach that next level. And I don't think you guys know this, but Right Conscious is the headquarters of everything related to Hemingway here on YouTube. In the playlist down below, you will find an ever-blossoming library of videos on Hemingway's life and all of his trauma, his books, and his writing and / life philosophy. And so, if you want more Hemingway, this is the place. But you're not here to hear from me. You are here to hear from Hemingway. A good writer should know as near everything as possible. Naturally, he will not. A great enough writer seems to be born with knowledge, but he really is not. He has only been born with the ability to learn in a quicker ratio to the passage of time than other men and without conscious application, and with an intelligence to accept or reject what is already presented as knowledge. There are some things which cannot be learned quickly, and time, which is all we have, must be paid heavily for their acquiring. They are the very simplest things, and because it takes a man's life to know them, the little new that each man gets from life is very costly, and the only heritage he has to leave. Every novel which is truly written contributes to the total knowledge which is there at the disposal of the next writer who comes. But the next writer must pay, always, a certain nominal percentage in experience to be able to understand and assimilate what is available as his birthright and what he must in turn take his departure from. And Hemingway, everyone, is spitting fire here because he isn't just talking about the time we have to dedicate to become a great writer, because it's bigger than just write. If you just write, you won't become great. To become great, you are going to have to spiral away from your consensual reality multiple times. Becoming a great writer is not just growth, it's also death. We have to deal in syntropy and entropy until we create the perfectly aligned character, the perfectly aligned artistic signal to write book after book in our chosen lane. Because when I look at most authors behind me, most of them wrote novel after novel in the same style, exploring similar themes, and they did that anywhere from usually 12 to 20 times throughout their career. And some authors, like, let's say, Margaret Atwood with Orcs and Crake, or The Handmaid's Tale, or Cormac McCarthy and The Road, they would do an offshoot dystopian novel or whatever. But in general, they were practicing and becoming obsessed with a singular vision of art. Because when you do art for art's sake and make art your entire persona, you can put out some good work. But the problem is that you become a slave to ideas and the muse. You don't fortify and build a beautiful palace for your art, then you are just wandering around and throwing seeds. And if you don't have a palace to come home to, as the years start to wear on, many of the art for art's sake creators start to fall off because they have nothing to hold on to. And how I like to think of it is, if I asked you right now, what literary lineage are you writing in? For instance, I write my poetry in the lineage of Li Po, Han Shan, Chinese wilderness poets, or Robert Bly, James Wright, Gary Snyder. Like, those are some names. And I feel like my goal over the next couple decades is to become the type of person through, yes, writing, but then through other actions in my life, to carry the torch of their work, the metaphysical vibe and imprint of their work on. Because some artistic lineages end forever, you guys. It's actually a really sad thing. It's something that we don't think about. But that's one of the things that is being lost right now. That with the computer, with the speed of light ability for us to create and write random trash stories and just flood the market with AI novels and a bunch of other stuff, we don't realize what we are losing. We don't realize that everyone behind me stood on the shoulders of someone else. There were some outliers, yes. Are not an outlier, though. We need you for the literary renaissance. I need you to be in the mindset that over the next 6 decades, you are going to grow something that's beautiful and important, and that it's okay for you to share it to the world, to sell it to the world, to talk about it to the world. So let's talk more practically now about this process of losing yourself to become a better author. In general, movies and stories show this time after time. Two of the most popular, obviously, are Frodo and Luke Skywalker, who are literally wounded and traumatized when they come home. They have this new ability. They have a new vision of reality. But what did they have to give up to be able to receive that? The same is true in shamanic healing and shamanic journeys and even religious journeys all throughout time. There is an element of pain and sacrifice that has to go into it. But one thing I do not want us to do is that when I see this a lot with the art for art's sake, the artist signaling archetype, they are in this constant stage of deleting parts of themselves and evolving into some new artistic trend or style or whatever, that they don't know what they are exactly leaving behind. Because here's a great example of this. I have been a yoga teacher. I'm not as active anymore, but I will be soon, for 14 years now or so. And I used to be deep in the game, and I saw countless people who were meditating, doing pranayama, aka breathing exercises, asana, psychedelics all the time, making it their entire life and doing hours of it every single day, doing ayahuasca or psychedelic rituals every single weekend. And all of them were leaving malignant aspects of their consciousness and character behind. But what they also, I don't think, realized, and if they did, they were so sad and traumatized that they didn't care. They were also leaving a lot of the positive aspects of their ego, aka self, and mind and consciousness at the door too. Because when you hit this mass delete button, when you hit the mass transform button, you can't really control what you are taking off. You know, the image that just came to my head is like maybe a piece of meat that's a little bit funky on one side. So you could sit and cut that out and do it meticulously. Or I'm thinking of a piece of salmon. I could just cut the tail off or something and throw it all away. There is some good meat in there, but when you do it fast and do it, big, it gets rid of everything. And so because in our Western culture, we have no ties to anything necessarily tangible or real that feels good, it can become very easy to want to just hit the delete button. My parents were, or I should say my grandparents were, on both sides, were both religious, and they tried to impart that onto my parents. My parents are kind of the black sheep of their families and kind of disregarded religion, but still held it somewhat dear to our heart. Like, we'd occasionally go to church, and when we'd visit them, we'd have to go to church and do all the activities. But in general, it was all very boring, not very stimulating. And then when you combine that with the normalcy of having corporate parents or just parents who work a lot and being indoctrinated in the outcome-based school system, then you just want to get free, or at least hopefully some people, many of us artists, want to get free. We decide we're just going to be a rocket and leave everything behind. And that's awesome. And I would never discourage anyone from doing that. But eventually you're going to have to realize that everything you need to be an artist already happened, even within the first 10 years of your life, if not the first 8 or 9. Rilke said that it would take you lifetimes to just write about or make art about the first couple of years of your life and what you remember from that. There's enough activity there that you don't need anything else. All the people that are all about ideas, catching the big fish, it's already there. You don't even have to do anything. You don't need to do transcendental meditation or whatever. But in our culture that has no respect for the elders, in our culture where, for instance, today I teach 12th grade English in a high school, in all my classes, everyone is 17 or 18 years old. The youngest person at our school is 14 years old. Most kids don't have a ton of exposure for long periods of time to varying ages of people, and also aren't taught how to respect, study, and learn from different types of people, whether they are kids and learning to have fun with people who are younger than you and just letting go, or actually getting wisdom or technical advice from someone who is much more skilled than you in whatever field. With online guides and AI, the people who have knowledge, people who have something to share are becoming obsolete. With people like me who are on YouTube and can give you advice about these niche topics on why you shouldn't use pronouns or something like that in your writing. Funny story, it will take 18 seconds. I worked at a school in Las Vegas that was very liberal. And in 2018, when the non-binary pronoun flipping movement kind of started, I had 40 or so of my 200 students that changed their names, their pronouns, and it became so confusing and they get so triggered if I screwed up that I just started calling everyone by their names. No matter the situation, he and she got totally eliminated from my vocabulary. And because, and this is good, we have no connection to transcendent experiences in our youth through rituals or whatever, and as we age, then we would rather exist, or I should say many people who are more of the artistic bent would rather exist in nothingness than the middle ground. Because when you have nothing, when you're constantly deleting and evolving and never building on anything, except this kind of ephemeral concept of writing, if you just keep writing and never plant a flag anywhere, you experience the zero state, the infant mind, the beginner's mind. And that's a trap though, because if you can start to hit transcendent experiences and pull yourself up toward that, you can still contemplate and exist in nothingness. But here's the pro tip. If you focus on attaining spiritual, transcendent experiences by whatever means necessary, however you want to do it, you are still going to have to give up things. There are still going to be positive parts and pain and suffering on this journey to becoming something better. But for whatever reason, and this is just the wisdom of life, that people who do this almost always end up better than the people who just continue to exist in the middle zone and do nothing, or just are always deleting. Because there's a certain non-objective, non-quantifiable, for all the logic bros out there, system that strips away a lot of the bad and leaves a lot of the good when you focus on that. And I love how Hemingway says is that these are the simple things, these things that we are transforming and learning. It's not to wear a scarf. It's not to be cool. It's not to do a little cool trick. And hey, I can use A, E, I, O, U sounds in this poem and they all are in this certain pattern and rhythm. It's not that. It's a core part of yourself. Because why does Hemingway have that it factor? Here I am talking about this and that. Let's talk about Hemingway. Why did he return to the well of his conflicted sexuality? Because speaking of gender binaries, his mom, dressing him as a girl, as a young boy, I should say, and that psychological impact. And then obviously him being emasculated by not being able to participate in the war and then receiving the Fisher King wound while being an ambulance driver, which is once again this idea of the wound, suffering. A lot of the time to jump across boundaries in terms of mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual growth, you need to suffer or lose something in one of them to gain something in something else. It's kind of this weird game. You don't always have to do that, but it is kind of a fast track. For instance, Hemingway having early childhood trauma and then receiving a wound. And when a man receives that Fisher King wound, it eliminates the physical body from the mix. And so growth, whether that's malignant or positive, most of the time malignant growth, still happens more in other aspects of the self, physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual, that grow faster because of that loss. All of that became the core of his consciousness, the core of his art. Hemingway's works are a field guide for trauma. And instead of mewing like Proust in that pain, Hemingway said, I'm going to transform all of this into symbols. I'm going to take this pain that I'm feeling, and instead of whining about it, I'm going to eliminate the exterior, I'm going to eliminate the interior and interiority and only focus on these external symbols, which was a mirror of what he was personally doing. Hemingway decided to go fully into external reality. He became a big game hunter. He wielded the large phallic gun with the phallic bullet and moved through trauma with hunting and with many of his other exploits, not as a way to connect with the land or get food for his family or restore or do whatever, but to magnify his masculinity, to become, he became this hyper-masculine figure who also had the ability to show us the psychic scape, for lack of a better word, of the reality of someone like that. Because when you think of a hyper-masculine individual, most of the time they eliminate interiority, and we focus on their heroic exploits, throughout classic literature and in culture. But what Hemingway did was somehow crack the code of how to show that individual, Jake Barnes, without getting mushy-gushy, without having an Achilles rage or something like that, without ranting or needing many of these other external levers like religion or war. Even though some of Hemingway's characters are in war, many of his stories are either before, in the middle, or after war. He didn't need these levers, and he gave us a perfect glimpse of that. But what did he have to do to provide that? Because there have been countless of traumatized boys who become these hyper-masculine men. We've known many of them. How many of them can give you a clear picture of what that's actually like? Very few. And many people who are, I see many writers who have a secondary character like that, use a more maximalist approach to write that. But that's the power of Hemingway's minimalism. That's the situation where it works. And once again, minimalism as a writing style, like we could all write something very similar to The Old Man and the Sea or The Stranger or For Whom the Bell Tolls Maybe Right Now. Like a lot of us, honestly, could write something that like at its core is just as good. But almost none of us could add in that symbolic correspondence that people like Hemingway or Raymond Carver, Bret Easton Ellis, some of those guys can infuse into their work. They were all talented individuals who spent at least a decade before they were even able to touch that in a longer work. Or in Carver's case, in his shorter works, but nonetheless. And so Hemingway dedicated everyone his entire life till his death to living that out. He was a method writer. That's what it takes to be a leader. It's what it takes to do this. You have to be respected. You can't be a faker. And there are outliers. But imagine if Hemingway was some little pulp writer who was like 5'2", 100 pounds in a New York City apartment. No one would care. He became the persona. Unfortunately, hopefully, many of us do not have to take a similar route as Hemingway with something that is such a malignant persona. But as authors, what we are doing is saying that I am self-important because you should contemplate what I feel, that there are 8 billion or whatever other people out there, but you should see a slice of my life. And if you are going to say that, if you are going to say I am a distributor of consumable artistic content, which also includes my personal life and how I present it to you and what you know about me, then why wouldn't you make that refined? Why wouldn't you do the same work that you do on your stories, on yourself, and on that persona and everything else? And when you think about it, almost everyone behind me does, or I should say did. And this is something missing in our anxiety culture, in our addict culture. It makes me emotional, you guys. Like I feel the tears welling up right now. I know people who are listening to this right now. Like I talk to people on Substack all the time. I know a ton of people who are messed up because of this world that we are in. And if they were born in 1910 with their parents, they wouldn't have been exposed to a lot of these malignant drugs and these malignant things that happen to people. And that's not an excuse. But so many people haven't even become comfortable with themselves yet, that when you talk about this idea of a persona and all this, so many writers, we're in a very introverted community, just shut down. But think about it through that frame. You're doing the same thing you do to your stories on yourself. You're not telling lies, but you're enhancing and choosing what to show. For instance, I talk about yoga a lot because a lot of the stuff I learned in yoga corresponds with the information I present to you guys. But I sometimes, a lot less, talk about jujitsu and the years I spent dedicating my life to various martial arts. I even talk less about me dedicating years of my life to skiing and starting a ski business and my traumatic experiences with my friends dying in skiing and like all this crazy stuff that happened. That doesn't come up very much because it's not relevant to the vision of the literary renaissance. We can only, the general, and this is what I love about Reddit comments. This is what I love about people commenting on my page or people making videos about me. They think I'm because they hear me mention yoga and being a yoga teacher, that I'm some like yoga guru, spiritual hipster fuckboy. But if you go look at my yoga page, Yogadelics, it's me just being a logic bro and talking about a lot more of the malignant aspects of yoga and how to fix them and stuff. I'm not some poster boy. But people will react to the initial things that they learn about you and carry that on. Your priming matters with your writing, but also with your packaging of your content and the packaging of how you present yourself. And this is why not having a pen name that shields your identity as a human being is so important. This is why putting yourself out there. If your name is Mike Hawk and you want Hawk to be something different because you don't want to get made fun of, then that's fine. That's not a pen name. But the amount of people who hide themselves because of the various mental problems that have cropped up in this odd society, and the people who create fake mental phantoms about their job firing them and people in their town caring that they're a writer. I've had random nobodies tell me, I don't want to say nobodies, I've had random writers who have no audience, who have never published online, tell me that they can't have a real name because they live in a town of 50,000 people or even 800 people, and that their kids will get harassed because they wrote a sex scene in a book. Guys, no one's even going to care or figure out for years that you wrote a book. And if you don't say there's sex scenes in this, no one's going to read it in your town of 800 people. And if they do, then you'll know the people who you don't want to be around, who can't handle art. Why hang out with them or deal with them anyway? And if your kids get bullied by them, then one, put them in martial arts so they can kick their ass if they get hit. And two, it will teach them social dynamics and the malignant side of that. It's not the end of the world. And I'm mentioning all of this because if you are worried about hiding your identity, if you are worried about putting your writing out there and becoming a leader for your thought process and for your lineage of writing that you are taking the torch of, then you have a long way to go if you want to go full time. You probably don't have very much to go to become a great author on paper, but no one will ever know. To reach both heights, unless you get lucky, it's going to require a lot of transformation, and that's what's being asked of us. That's what the literary renaissance is about. It's not a singular vision, it's not a movement. But if I can somehow convince, alongside many others who are doing the work right now in motivating authors, awakening authors, if we can have 50,000 people that believe, that have become the type of people to represent their lineage, like Ernest Hemingway did, for better or for worse. If we find 50,000 people, we don't even have in the entire community 100 people doing that who are still alive. If we get 50,000, it would be unprecedented. Think of the impact that, for instance, rap music has. Rap music, cloud rap, the cloud rap, Young Lean, Drain Gang, Buffet Boys, G59, Team Sesh, whatever revolution that happened. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it doesn't matter. In 2013, 2014, bunch of random dudes in their closets and garages who are 18, 19, taking rap into their own hands and redefining it, bringing in a whole new element of sound and content, and then saying, I'm not going to hide from this. I'm going to go on fucking tour. I'm going to sell merch. I'm going to promote my work. Music is transformative. Concerts are fun. We all know this. But you could listen to every single rapper that's almost ever existed, maybe outside of some of the great lyricists. And you could learn more from reality. And this is the same with rock music and other stuff that have lyrics from a couple of really good books. The medium in terms of lyrics isn't that strong. Music on its own, obviously, can rewire and change everything. And lyrics do add something to that. But the novel, poetry, is in terms of complexity and what it can do to the brain, light years beyond music lyrics. And with authors, to become a great author means that you have to become a great reader. To become a great cloud rapper, you could have never read a fucking book in your life. And so what I am imagining and what's going to happen and what we're going to have to, if we can leave things behind and become great, then there'll be 50,000 people who can talk. This is the problem with rappers. If you listen to Kendrick Lamar or Kanye West or Drake speak, they are not the most intelligent people. I could say the same about Eminem, Young Lean, Bones, name any rapper. There are exceptions. Stickman and M1 from Dead Prez, Immortal Technique, Vinny Paz, some of these people. They have read books. They have a decent grasp of knowledge, and they can. That's why they can go on the Joe Rogan podcast or whatever and speak about things outside of rap. But with authors, we can talk about almost everything. Every author I know is pretty fun to talk to because, as Hemingway said, that we are born with this ability to learn in a quicker ratio. I mean, that's one of the things. We consume information and synthesize and export it. And so, as always, I want to remind you guys that this is at least a 3 to 5 year journey if you are at step 1. Maybe some of you guys will make that quantum leap. But year 5 is you getting toward, a brown belt or a black belt level of integrating your work and your writing and everything together. And that doesn't mean that you are the greatest author of all time, but that you are a living representation on the page and off the page of your work and are ready to let it be shared with the world. And it's honestly a vibrational thing too. Like, I know people hate that word, but whatever you want to call it, that I can look at all these authors who complain, and I can look at who they are, how they act, their aura of their writing and of themselves and how they present themselves. And I can be like, yeah, damn right. No one wants to have anything to do with you. And guess what, guys? I'm not done with this process either. I have been petty on this channel before toward other content creators or writers. I have fallen into malignant fights and consciousness and dissed on people and religion and, stuff in ways that I shouldn't have done. It's a work of continuous growth that I've only been at technically for 2.5 years. And so the best way to do it is do it live. You don't have to get on camera. You don't have to do a podcast. You can write about it. You can talk about it. I would love to hear from you. We are on Substack.com, which is where in 2025, the literary renaissance is happening. Maybe it will shift to another platform. I'm platform agnostic, but it's the best spot for writers right now to serve as a bridge from you funneling in your writers from wherever to them buying your books and you creating a legacy and becoming a full-time author. It is also a place where you can also hopefully get some new readers. But we are on Substack.com. As I discussed earlier, I have a Hemingway book club. I am going to start putting out Hemingway course videos. I would love to have you over there. I have free content and I have paid content. I would love to have you there for both. But even more so, I would love for you to start posting over there and start finding your people and start creating waves in the community. And so thank you guys for being here. Hopefully I broke this quote down at length. It's all a lot. I mean, this is dozens of hours of content. Like we barely scratched the surface of how to go about deleting parts of yourself, how to do this. I gave the general guideline of focus on transcendent experiences, but there is a lot of practical advice that, I'll maybe have to get into in another video. Peace out, everybody.